Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 308 or 308. My name is Jono Logan, and a few weeks ago, I came back from Nova Scotia, but Nova Scotia just came for me. My parents were in town for a few days, which was really, really nice, and we went to the Stratford Festival in Stratford, Ontario. It is the biggest theater festival in Canada, and it is internationally known as, I honestly think, one of the best theater festivals in the world. It is an extraordinary festival, and I saw a few shows, and some of them were absolutely excellent. Something's Rotten is their big musical this year, and it's a parody of Shakespeare and musicals, and it was probably their best musical they put on in years. The other thing I saw was the world premiere of a new play called Salesman in China, and it was honestly one of the best new plays I've ever seen or read. It was just, I had a really, really good couple of days. I understand it's a little bit late to get people, if anyone's listening to this from Canada or Ontario or the northeastern United States. You should go to the Stratford Festival, but it's also very late in their season, so they might be done by the time you get up there. Anyway, I just want to talk about it very, very briefly because I know that this is a video game podcast, but I don't really have anywhere to talk about theater. And since I host this, I can basically do whatever I want.
Very true.
Yeah. So anyway, my parents left 3 hours ago, so I was rushing to prep for this episode of Random Encounter. And boy, it's been worth it, but it's been a lot because we are talking about two really, really big games that just came out, including one that reviews literally just dropped today for. The reviews will be coming out at the exact same time as this episode, as a matter of fact. So why don't we meet our panel? First up is Audra.
Hello.
And Ben.
Hey.
So, as I said, we're recording this episode a few days before the reviews drop for the first game we're talking about, which is Dragon Age: The Veilguard. So, we have no idea what the online response to this game is going to be. And honestly, that's kind of scary because, oh my God, what if we like the game and the internet decides that it's the worst game of the decade? And that is like, oh, yeah. But you know what? It's okay. Because I'm pretty sure that I haven't talked to her yet, but I'm pretty sure that Audra is going to be rather positive about this. But if you want negativity on your podcast, do not worry, because the second half of this podcast, we're going to be discussing Romancing SaGa 2. So if it's negativity you want, stay tuned. You're probably not going to be getting it from Ben, who gave it a 95, but you're going to get some negativity from me, damn it, because again, it's my podcast and I can do what I want. So anyway, let's talk about Dragon Age: The Veilguard. So Dragon Age, the Dragon Age series is a flagship series from BioWare, and it's kind of, I guess at the time, it was kind of their answer, their fantasy answer to the sci-fi stylings of Mass Effect. So Dragon Age Origins came out in 2009, which doesn't seem like that long ago, but is, and it was a title that it really leaned into the origins part of the title, as in every character background that you could have, like a noble or a mage. It offered unique story interactions that really influenced the journey of the character throughout the game. And it focused very heavily on player-driven decisions, had branching story paths, impactful consequences. And it also introduced a rather tactical combat system. You could pause and assign commands, which is a hallmark of BioWare at the time. And they had some incredible companions. So this game was a massive hit, and they came out with Dragon Age 2, which turned out to be a rather divisive game. The emphasis shifted from like a save the world kind of thing to a smaller type of thing, and the action combat became a lot more fast paced. You could still use tactical planning, but it became a lot more fast paced, and also character relationships became a whole lot deeper. There's the BioWare. Romancing came into Dragon Age 2, didn't it, Audra?
It also is an Origin.
It was also an Origin? Okay. Mm-hmm. And then Dragon Age Inquisition came out in 2014. This was the third game, and it became a massive, massive hit for BioWare. Had expansive semi-open world areas, again, deeper character and relationship building. And of course, lots and lots of choices, which is another aspect, which is an aspect of this series, which is loved. It won several Game of the Year awards. And then nothing, literally just nothing. Nothing for quite some time. But now we have a brand new chapter in the Dragon Age series. Unfortunately, there are quite a few people out there who are a little nervous about it, given BioWare's last few games since Inquisition in 2014. Mass Effect Andromeda had its fans, and I'm one of them.
Yay!
But even they would be forced to say that it was somewhat lacking as compared to the first 3 games in the series in a number of ways. It was still very good, though. At least I think it was good. Anthem, on the other hand, was an unmitigated disaster for BioWare. Its online multiplayer gameplay was like light years away from what fans expected from the developer, and it was a game that was supposed to last forever. And then BioWare promised to fix the game in February of 2020. Then something happened immediately after that, and they announced that they will be stopping any development in 2021, which makes it essentially a dead game. But you want to know what? That's all in the past. And the future might be bright. So let's talk about Dragon Age, the Veilguard. Okay, first off, it was announced back in 2022 as Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and then it was renamed Dragon Age, the Veilguard, with the reveal trailer that came out June of this year. Audra, I know you're a big Dragon Age fan. What was your response to the initial trailer?
I really enjoyed it. It made me intrigued as to what was going to happen in the game itself.
I think it did me too, and that trailer itself became a bit of I hate controversy, but it was controversy in a way because some people were commenting on the character designs and how they are slightly different from the character, not the designs, but the style of initial games. But on the whole, it was, warmly received, and people started getting really excited for this, and they're really hoping that BioWare is back. So, without any spoilers, we might be getting some small spoilers later. Is this good? Is it good?
Yes, very.
That's a fantastic
really
thing to hear.
Pleasantly surprised.
Oh, that is wonderful. That is wonderful to hear. I am very happy that BioWare did not screw this up.
It's easily one of the most polished BioWare games I've played.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I think they've put a lot of effort into it.
BioWare literally could not afford to screw this up. If they had, I honestly think that might have been, if not the end, at least near the end of BioWare. So the fact that sounds like they pulled this off is really, really good. Okay, so what is the central story here in the Veilguard? Like, no big spoilers or anything like that, but what is the general plot?
Basically, you play as Rook, who is a person with like different faction origins and different race origins, depending on what you choose.
Mm-hmm.
And even like you can do gender identity, which I thought was really cool.
It's nice how things change over time, because that definitely wasn't an option in 2009.
No.
At least not for video games. At least not for this game.
And Rook gets kind of scouted by Harding and Varric to help them with trying to stop Solus, who was the Dreadwolf from the Inquisition. I don't think that's much of a spoiler now, hopefully. And he's trying to tear down the veil to bring back the ancient Elven Empire, I think. It's pretty much.
So let me take a wild guess and assume that you are guarding this veil?
Yes, because destroying it would basically end Thedas, the world of Thedas as you know it. So in order to restore things to how he thought they should be, he was going to basically kind of annihilate everybody who existed now, which, yep.
Really funny how tyrants kind of take that tact, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to destroy all institutions and people who stand in my way once I get power. Funny that. No parallels at all that are going to be... incidentally, this is the last episode before the friggin' election, so I'm feeling fairly doom-scrolly at the moment. I'm going to try to not let that impact my enthusiasm for these games. It certainly is not going to impact my enthusiasm for Saga. So, Audra, so it sounds like there's a fair bit of lore between the series that's continuing here. It's not just a sequel in name. It is genuinely the fourth entry in the Dragon Age series with characters and environments that are returning.
Yes, there's numerous cameos, which I love, like returning characters and from all throughout the canon of Dragon Age.
Interesting. So they're doing, it's a Legend of Heroes kind of thing.
Kind of.
Is it friendly to new players? Because that's always the concern, that the fourth entry of a series, they're going to go in and they're going to be like, I have no idea who any of these people are, what the world is, what the stakes are. Does it do a good job establishing all of that, even though it's the fourth entry?
I think so. They spend a lot of time introducing you to different areas of Thedas that like they've kind of talked about in previous games, but you haven't actually gone there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like the catacombs of Navarre and the Minrathos, the capital of the Tevinter Imperium.
That's a sign of good writers when they drop some things like that in earlier games, and they're just thread that future writers can pick up on. So it sounds like it. I mean, at least in terms of the game, at least in terms of the plot, it's a genuine successor to the Dragon Age series. Let's talk about the gameplay for a second. So, are there any new gameplay mechanics introduced here, and how does the combat gameplay system compare to the previous entries in the series?
It's definitely much more action RPG forward, I'd say, but in a good way. I found it really, having played a lot of action RPGs in the past, I really have been able to dive into the combo system, and even firing range, because I'm playing a mage character, is actually fantastically done. Once you get into range of a character of a thing, you can actually do sniping, and they even have special finishing moves and ultimate attacks that you can do once you build up a meter.
Oh, neat.
Yep. It's very fun, and the AI for the companions is on point. I haven't seen them doing anything that's really dumb during fights.
I mean, that's good to hear, because that's one of the worst parts about companions. You may love them. They may be enchanting, delightful characters, but they can do some dumb stuff to make your life miserable on the battlefield. Definitely
better than, I found, even the camera angles, I'm not fighting the camera as much as I did with Inquisition or Dragon Age 2.
Oh, that's excellent. The thing about BioWare that, I mean, like you said, like we were alluding to, some of their games were slightly buggy. Andromeda was damn near unplayable at launch. Even when I played it, years later,
yes,
it still ran like crap on my PC, and I had a decent PC. You say that this is the most polished, so you're not experiencing too many game-breaking bugs or anything like that?
No, I've noticed a few, sometimes the little nug creatures that populate Thetis, they can sometimes float in the air.
Okay,
and stuff,
well, that's better than people not having skin on their face.
But other than that, it's easily, to me, one of the best-looking games that they've done.
Excellent.
And, I actually like the new designs. I think it took a little bit of time getting used to them, but I feel like they're more animated.
Okay. Because you mentioned the combat is a lot more, action RPG oriented. Are there any nods to the more tactical oriented nature in the past? Is there anything on the battlefield that actually plays into that, positioning people or that sort of thing?
You can open up an ability wheel that allows you to choose. It'll pause the game slightly, so that you can choose some of your special attacks directly, so that when you're in the action RPG component, I'd say it's more akin to Trails Through Daybreak, where it's you have the action RPG and then you can pause the game and you can choose different abilities and even combos with other characters.
Yeah, that seems to be where most RPG combat is going nowadays. Even JRPG turn-based combat, it's becoming much more active.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the previous entries, are there any? I know the answer to this is yes, because the last time one of these games was released, it was 2014. And if there were not quality of life improvements between these two games, that would be a bit of a problem. If they just didn't pay any attention to anything that's happened in the last 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
What quality of life features can people expect here as compared to, say, Inquisition, that will just make life easier for them and provide, hopefully, a much better gameplay experience?
Definitely, you're not wrestling the camera nearly as much as I did with I found myself with Inquisition. If you got into a wrong angle when you were in the fight,
ugh.
Yeah, those fade rifts could sometimes.
They finally learned how to position the camera.
Yeah, and they actually will mark on. They have a world map that will have all the different regions that you can travel to as they unlock, and they will actually note on there when you have new quests opened up in each area, so that you're not missing anything. So you can opt to go to the different areas and do the quests whenever they pop up, which I found really helpful. Yeah, and nice, because then you're not having to travel to every single place, because it's such a huge world map that I think that would have been very time consuming. And
Inquisition was semi-open world. Did they go full open world here?
No, they toned it down from Inquisition, but it's nowhere near as like constricting and claustrophobic as like Dragon Age 2 could be.
Okay.
So the
They're still
areas
big
are
areas.
Yeah, the areas are pretty huge, but they're not like nearly as you can't get lost in them for hours and hours and hours.
Okay, well, that's actually a good thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Getting rid of open world fever is something that I think can only improve video games in the near future. Again, Dragon Age, really known for its character relationships and your companions. So I'm curious, without any spoilers for anything big, are there any like major companions in this game? And just out of curiosity, who's your favorite thus far?
Yes, there are several major companions that make up the titular Veilguard, basically. And beyond Harding, who was a character in Inquisition, they're all kind of new to this game, which I thought was an interesting touch so that it's kind of more newcomer friendly, I think.
I'm glad that they are expanding the lore rather than looking backwards all the way.
Mm-hmm. And I love so many of them. I have to give them credit. The two mascot characters are actually adorable and not annoying.
I mean, that in itself is an achievement.
Yes. You have a griffin and a skeleton butler who doesn't talk, but he's just very full of life, which is funny.
Mm-hmm. It's always nice when the help knows their place and doesn't speak. Oh, God.
Well, he's kind of a mute, but he's very expressive regardless.
Oh, good. I mean, they sound fun.
My favorite companions would probably be, I love Bellara. She's a veil jumper elf that you meet pretty early on in the game, and she's kind of like Meryl if Meryl wasn't from GTA 2, if Meryl wasn't so naively stubborn that it got bordered on annoying later on in her character arc. So she's just a really fun, full of sunshine. And it's kind of like she's going through conflict because she's seen all this horrible stuff going on as the game progresses. And it's kind of like, how does she deal with that? And I kind of just adore her.
Aw.
And Emmerich is probably the most kind-hearted necromancer I've ever seen in a game. And he's just a delight.
Neat.
And I love the dragon hunter Tosh, who has a very, very big, prominent, and memorable character development arc, but I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, I suppose that, well, this is probably a non-negotiable for Dragon Age fans. Are many of these characters romanceable?
I believe pretty much everyone is.
Yay!
You get romance options for them. I don't know if they lead anywhere depending on, because I've only picked for, my personal favorite for the romance was Lucanus, the Antivan Crow assassin. I see. Yes.
Look at that beard.
He has he's awesome because he loves coffee and my bias.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm glad that the romance is back after so many years away. Well, I mean, the characters being engaging and awesome and also obviously romanceable is important. But as we briefly talked about the environments, and it's not open world, what kind of environments can players expect to explore in this game? Any place really interesting?
Actually, they're all pretty unique. I found them to be very varied and diverse in terms of like the local fauna and just the general feel of each area. There's not anything. It doesn't have like sometimes in Western RPGs you get like areas that are just like browns and grays a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually quite a colorful place. I love Arlathan, which is like an elven forest area. It's full of like floating buildings and water that's just going like throughout the sky, falling down, and it's
pretty.
Yeah, it's very pretty. And Minrathos is it's a bustling city town. The dock town area is bustling, and you have like areas that look obviously more well off than others, but it's full of like NPCs and just a whole bunch of little details that really make it stand out. So I've liked all the areas I've seen so far. You don't get as much for like areas like the Anderfells. You don't spend as much time there, but I like them too.
Okay.
So I think a lot of the areas are very varied and there's a lot of graphical diversity.
Okay. the main story of an RPG is obviously important, especially an RPG like this. But realistically speaking, who the hell cares? Because you want side quests, you want to be distracted from every end of the world, whatever. I have to save this woman's cow. Just curious, are how are the side quests in this game? And do they impact the main story at all? Do they intersect, or are they just kind of standalone, crazy, wacky, different tones, that sort of thing?
They do impact the story. You have each area has a different faction for it. Like the Shadow Dragons are for the Tevinter, and they're basically like the anti-slavery group that's trying to go against the Venatori in the area and stuff. And Arlathan has the Veil Jumpers, which are like just kind of tech gurus who travel around the ruins and find interesting stuff in them. And basically doing quests for them, the side quests raise the level of a faction's strength in each area. And depending on what you do, faction strength can actually have an impact on story later on. Like, you can actually make choices to weaken a faction if you end up doing certain things in the game. And that could impact, like, what happens in the actual plot.
It's nice to hear that the ability to impact the world is still there, alive and well in this game, and how you can actually change things.
I mean, there is a lot of some of the quests can be a little familiar. Like, if someone's telling you to go see there, I'm afraid for my friend who lives in a cabin out in the woods. Odds are good you're going to find a dead body instead of the friend. But
well, at least you're going to find a dead body instead of an audio log following the Bethesda model.
But you do get, like, you'll actually get some in-depth things later. If you go back to that character to talk to them, they'll usually explain, like, why they actually cared about this person. Like, it breathes kind of life into the different regions. So you get a sense for, like, the side characters, even if, like, you're hanging out in the town hub mostly with, like, your main party members. You still get a sense of, like, the other people.
Okay. Something interesting that I was reading. Okay, I probably should have mentioned this off the top. I've never played any of the Dragon Age games. I really got into BioWare's some of their other titles, including Mass Effect. Was it last year or was it the year before that? It was the year before that. Oh my god. Yeah, we did a bunch of Retro Encounter episodes on Mass Effect. And I've been meaning to do Dragon Age, but also I was like, I'll just wait until they do a Legendary Collection like they did for Mass Effect, and that didn't happen. But I have read that one of the major components that people just loved about Inquisition was that it offered co-op multiplayer. And it seems like they removed it from, well, I guess they didn't remove it because it was never in this game, but they moved away from that. Apparently, they got real scared by their last attempt at anything multiplayer. So this is a single player game, solid, no co-op. It's just you, right?
Yes. And they actually give you the option. You can opt to not even link to an EA account, which is, I think, one of the first times they've done that in a game recently. Most BioWare games, they kind of force you to create an account. And
how in the hell did they ever get away with that?
I don't know, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, that's a nice customer. That's going to win some support. Anytime you don't need to do anytime you don't have to interact with EA is a win for the customer. Okay, wow, that's kind of crazy. So let's say you beat the game. It's a very big game, right?
Yes, it is pretty massive. Like, every time I was like, oh, this is going to be a short story quest, it'll open up like about 5 more as they're going through it and stuff. So,
well, in that case, this kind of answers that question, I would imagine, especially based on what you said about character choice. But I imagine that there's probably going to be a fair bit of replayability here in terms of character choice, the factions you choose to align with, how you treat your companions, that sort of thing. So this is probably going to have a bit of a good amount of gameplay past the just beat the main quest, right?
Yes, I can imagine so. I know a lot of people who play BioWare games like nonstop repeatedly just to see what the different outcomes are. So if, like, I could see this being one of those games that you could just, if you really wanted to get lost in the lore and see how far down the tunnel certain things will go, you could be replaying it for quite a while.
Holy crap. If this thing reaches Inquisition levels of popularity, we could be looking at like 3 games of the year in 3 episodes of Random Encounter. Because last week was Metaphor and Echoes of Wisdom, and there's this. So that would be interesting. There's a lot of like potential games of the year got released near the end of the year this year.
I know some people are very afraid of this one because it has like a relatively new development team and everything, but I think they really knocked it out of the park.
That's so good to hear. And it sounds like they also managed to maintain the essence of what makes Dragon Age interesting and why the fans love it. Okay, well, I'm going to end it with just 2 questions about it. First off, what sets this game apart from its predecessors, aside from the fact that it's the first game in 10 years? But is there anything that really sets it apart from those games? Like maybe as a launching pad to a new trilogy or that kind of thing?
I think the fact that they're going into different regions that they really hadn't explored because they were so focused on like the southern area of Thedas in the first 3 games is really interesting, and it kind of sets up, they have some really interesting lore background that kind of, I'm not going to spoil it, but it definitely adds some new flavor to the mythos.
Neat. And what excites you the most about the release of this game? Like when it comes out, what are you kind of most excited to hear people react to?
I hope it'll be the story and characters because I love them.
That would be delightful, in my opinion.
Yes.
If they manage to do that. All right. Well, hopefully they get the level of support they want. And if you're looking for a way to support us here at RPG Fan, we've opened a store. You can do so. You can find it at Why Are You Laughing, Ben?
It was a good transition.
It was a good transition, wasn't it? Right to the ending. Okay, I suppose you want to justify your appearance here, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was lovely listening to Audra talk about Dragon Age, but I mean, I think I'm supposed to serve some other purpose than being a fly on the wall.
It was lovely. Why would we want to spoil that lovely, lovely time that we just had? Okay. Well, Audra, thank you very much for first off talking about it, but also for you're still playing it. Obviously, this thing is big. It's really big, right?
It is. It's quite massive.
Again, Audra, thank you for just plowing through as much of the game as you have so far, and for continuing to plow through the game from here.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. It's been fun.
It sounds it. Okay, talking about fun, this is not going to be Romancing SaGa 2.
He's committed to the bit. If he can't give up the SaGa hatred bit, no matter what.
I have this bone, and I'm not letting it go. So we're talking about Romancing SaGa 2: Revenge of the Seven. So I'll give you a little bit of history about the Romancing SaGa series. A genuine one. I'm not gonna be like the history. Well, once there was a pile of garbage. No, I'll give you. Here's the truth. Okay, so SaGa started out with in the West anyway with Final Fantasy Legend on the Game Boy in 1989, and it was an extremely experimental RPG for the time, especially for the Game Boy. The SaGa games were designed to be very non-linear. And player choices, impacted the story, which was a significant change to most JRPGs in the market in the 90s, which told fairly linear stories all the way through, especially the Final Fantasy games, as much as we love them. So presumably Squaresoft, as they were known at the time, looked at the SaGa series and was like, well, we have some success with Final Fantasy. Let's slap that on the box instead. And they did. And there were 3 of them. So there's Final Fantasy Legend 1, 2, and 3 that came out on the Game Boy.
And the first SaGa was Square's first million-selling game. So it was their original big success.
Yeah. And it was. I remember playing it on the Game Boy. Never finished it. Because even then, I was like, I don't like this. But it really did emphasize exploration over linear storytelling, minimal guidance. It really did focus on player discovery and replayability. Now, despite the fact that these things were massive hits on the Game Boy, absolutely bizarrely, the first Romancing SaGa was released on the Super Famicom, which was a pretty big success in Japan. And
huge success. Yeah, they all 3 Romancing SaGas sold over 1 million copies, with Romancing SaGa 2 selling 1.5 million just in Japan alone. And that was like the biggest selling of all 3.
And presumably Squaresoft looked at the sales numbers of the Game Boy and the sales numbers of Romancing SaGa in Japan and was like, I don't think this is going to have any appeal over in the West. So they never released it. So Romancing SaGa 2, which came out in Japan in 1993, and Romancing SaGa 3, which came out in 1995, all three of them were those mythic games that we saw screenshots of in video game magazines that were grainy and were taken on like a Polaroid, and we're like, that looks like Final Fantasy. I want to play that.
Yeah, and I think they were just a consequence of the really the game localization kind of was still in its infancy back then, and even up into the early PS1 era, it still was too. So, I mean, we didn't get Romancing SaGa 1, 2, and 3, but we also didn't get Final Fantasy 5, right? So
very true.
There were some really big omissions back then, and I think it was just, somewhat thinking Western players wouldn't adapt to a more mechanics-focused, mechanics-heavy RPG, and also, there just wasn't a lot of, at that time, it was like one guy translating a game, so there just wasn't the resources back then, yeah.
But they did end up releasing the next two, SaGa Frontier and SaGa Frontier 2 on the PlayStation in 1997 and 1999. And you're right, around that time, 1997 especially, things got interesting in the JRPG space for PlayStation players. That was followed by Unlimited SaGa in 2002 for the PS2, SaGa The Scarlet Grace for the Vita in 2016. And then there was a massive break. And finally, we got a new game, SaGa Emerald Beyond, came out earlier this year. Izzy reviewed it and gave it an 81. I am pretty sure that I roasted the crap out of that one on random too. Just going to take a guess at that one. And there was also some remasters and 2D remakes. The initial remaster of Romancing SaGa 2 came out in 2017. It was the very first time that Romancing SaGa 2 was released in the West. And at the time, Alana reviewed it and gave it a 75. And then Romancing SaGa 3's remaster came out in 2019. And that was reviewed by one Jonathan Logan, who gave it a 68. So, wow, that guy does not like this series.
Oh, no.
That being said, this series is very clearly beloved by many. And I am not going to allow my clear prejudice to get in the way of talking with someone who clearly loves them and specifically loved this game. So, Ben, let's talk SaGa, specifically the recent remake of Romancing SaGa 2. So in more detail than I said above, what would you say the SaGa series does differently from most other JRPGs of its era? And even today, actually.
Yeah. So I think that probably the biggest difference between a typical SaGa game and then your typical like JRPG is that SaGa games tend to be non-linear. They tend to have a lot of narrative choice and also progression differences that are hinge on that kind of the choices that you make. So you can kind of tackle the games in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different routes, and making certain choices will block you off from other ones, and that will kind of affect, how you progress in the game. And so that it's very unlikely that two players are going to have exactly the same experience when they play a SaGa game. And then I would say the other major difference is, SaGa is very mechanics focused. Definitely there are quite a few games of the series that have a big focus on narrative as well, but the battle mechanics and the kind of layered mechanics that are applied to the battle system are a big feature of SaGa games, particularly some of the more recent SaGa games like Scarlet Grace or Emerald Beyond, where most of the game is, traversing a world map and then combat. So what kind of sets Romancing SaGa 2, this Romancing SaGa 2 remake apart is that it does feel a lot more in some ways like a traditional JRPG in terms of the structure and the kind of construction of the world and the way you explore the world, as opposed to something like Scarlet Grace or Emerald Beyond, which is something I think makes it a lot more approachable for players who maybe haven't gotten to the SaGa series before. Because admittedly, even though I am a big fan of SaGa, a lot of games in the series are not exactly very accessible to newcomers. And I think that this game, it made a point to be more accessible. And I think that that's worked out actually quite well with this release.
Romancing SaGa has always, this is not me making fun of it either, it's always been in the shadow of Final Fantasy as like the black sheep of the Squaresoft family. Whereas Final Fantasy was much more accessible, marketable, with more straightforward gameplay mechanics and storyline, whereas Romancing SaGa was much more experimental in the way that it approached combat and obviously the storyline.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think maybe, I don't know if it was so much of a black sheep in Japan, because this series is very popular in Japan, but in the West, absolutely. Just because we missed out on so many of the games, and then also the games are just, can be pretty divisive here for player tastes. But yeah, and I think in that way they complement each other, right? So, Final Fantasy is often focused on being very accessible. It's focused on telling a very cohesive narrative, and it's focused on like production value and, a kind of cinematic experience, especially a lot of the later Final Fantasies with the PS1 era on. And SaGa is like the opposite of that in a lot of ways, right? It's very mechanically dense. It's very, there's a lot of player agency and player choice. So you're not railroaded into a particular narrative. But then the narrative also, is kind of at your pace and your ability to progress and explore. And, it's not as worried about like getting you into the experience easily. And then, the production value has often been a lot lower, though that's not so much the case with this remake. Actually, they did a lot to kind of elevate the production values of this game compared to a lot of the other games in the series. So
yeah, it's really interesting to me that when I played Romancing SaGa 3, despite how I felt about it, what really struck me was just how they were using the identical toolbox of, well, frankly, Final Fantasy VI. They were using the same tools, it being like there are towns, you have a world map, you have the ability to traverse the world map on it. And they were using those tools in a completely different way. And what really struck me was just how it was absolutely unheard of for a game like this to exist on the Super Famicom or the Super Nintendo in the mid 90s. Like the mechanics of this thing were much more similar to, well, a BioWare game or just like an RPG, a PC RPG. It was much more similar to a PC RPG in terms of player choice and consequence of actions and being able to miss things.
Yeah, and that's a lot of that is due to Akitoshi Kawazu, who is the creator of the SaGa series, and
also basically created the prototype of the SaGa series with Final Fantasy II.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And he was the director on the 3 Romancing SaGa games, and has been the producer of the series since. He took a lot of inspiration from tabletop role-playing games for the SaGa series. That's seen most with Unlimited SaGa, which is basically a digital version of a tabletop role-playing game in a lot of ways. But taking that influence, and so that's a lot. That's why a lot of you got the nonlinearity, the choice and consequence, and the more CRPG type elements, because a lot of Western CRPGs were heavily based on tabletop RPGs, and SaGa itself is also very heavily based on those tabletop RPGs, especially in its mechanics and its construction of narrative and progression in a way that a lot of our other JRPGs kind of abandoned to be a little bit more streamlined.
Okay, well, let's talk about specifically this one. So I don't want to quite stop talking about history yet. I just want to know, the original games, I don't know if you've ever played them, but you know them pretty well.
Yeah.
With your knowledge of the original game, what was your first impression when you were starting this remake of Romancing SaGa 2, Revenge of the Seven?
Yeah, so, I think that the biggest difference when you're first approaching this game, if you're a fan of the original, like I am, is that, the scope has just been massively expanded. So you're no longer dealing with, 2D sprites and, corridor dungeons and that sort of thing, the little towns with 5 buildings and everything, right? Like, this is a fully realized 3D world, and that applies to pretty much every aspect of the game. And so my first initial impression, I was really impressed with how they managed to carry over like every single location, every single area and quest, and all those kind of little things that were, and details in the environment and the monster designs and all that. So things that were maybe a little easier to do in that kind of more traditional and some simpler kind of the style of a 2D classic RPG. All of those things have been brought over and then expanded. So you have, areas that have a lot more mechanics in terms of their, exploration and, new puzzles and new things in the environment. The way you interact with enemies is different. So actually breaking with a lot of, RPGs at the time, the Romancing SaGa games did have on-field encounters. It was a really early series, to do that on-field encounters on the Super Nintendo. But, the way that that's done in this game is so much more engaging because you're in a fully 3D space. So now monsters can ambush you from around a corner. They can, pop out of the ground. You can see them in the distance and they can charge after you. Like there's so much more, it's so much more immersive, I guess I would say, and feels so much more realistic in the presentation. And that just has a huge impact on like your experience of engaging with the world and the locations within it.
Let's talk a little about the plot for a second, because it does have a Romancing SaGa games, generally speaking, are not, they do have plots, obviously, but they're more scattershot focused. Does tend to be, it's almost more side quest based in a lot of ways. But this game does have a very, very powerful inciting incident which launches everything off. So what happens?
Yes. So, the basic premise of this game is that you are, you start out as Gerard, who is the son of the Emperor in the Kingdom of Avalon. And there are these mythical heroes of legend, the 7 heroes that are in the title. And they, are known in the legend for having saved the world from calamity. And now, we're thousands of years later, and they've now returned. But, rather than their return being something that's exciting and beneficial, they've returned and they are in these corrupted forms, and they're, bringing destruction with them and increased amount of monsters, and all kinds of calamity has followed them. And so, that touches the Kingdom of Avalon because one of the heroes, Kazinsi, attacks the kingdom, invades the kingdom, kills Gerard's brother Victor, who was defending the kingdom. And then when Leon, the emperor, and Gerard's father, and Gerard go to confront Kazinsi, he kills Leon as well. So that's kind of your inciting incident there. And then Gerard is forced to take the throne. And that kind of is what introduces you to the game's central mechanic as well. So the main thing about this game is that this is actually a story that takes place across generations. So across hundreds and thousands of years, is the scope of this game. So that initial storyline with Gerard, eventually Gerard, you assemble his retinue, you strengthen him, and then you're able to fight Kazinsi and defeat him. And then that causes you to actually move forward in time about 100 years to the next generation. And so it's, that's very unique for both, RPGs in general, but also the SaGa series in particular, because most SaGa games have like a cast of characters that you can pick from, and then they each have their own stories, and maybe they intersect with each other. But that's
basically Romancing SaGa 2 looked at Dragon Quest V and was like, "That's cute."
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Aww,
So it's
look, they look at the little son, look at the little kids going off.
Right. Imagine instead of doing one person's life and their kids, we did hundreds and hundreds of years. And so that gives there's a mechanical element to that, because there's this thing called inheritance magic that Leon, Gerard's father, was granted, and that allows him to pass on his skills to Gerard, and then Gerard to pass on his skills to the next person in line for the throne, and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're accumulating all of the experience and techniques and expertise of the emperors previous to you, and slowly building up your power and developing your empire, so that you can take on this otherworldly threat of these 7 heroes that have returned.
I like how narratively, if not mechanically, this entire dynasty is just rogueliting their way through the thousands of years.
Yes. And it does kind of, so it doesn't have that same, structure as a roguelike, but the basic outline of kind of how you engage with the game is somewhat similar in that you're having these multiple generations, and through those generations, you're building up your power, building up your party, and building up your skills and masteries and your kingdom as well, because you're developing, facilities in your kingdom to give you better equipment and better spells and things like that, so that you're ready to take on this final threat of the 7 heroes, which is just a very unique premise, for any game. And in the Saga series in particular, there's no other game in the series that really does this. And I think that is kind of the central appeal of this game, is that it you feel this sense of accomplishment and purpose. Every generation, your emperor gets more and more powerful. You've collected all these skills, and you just, you feel ready to take on the challenge that the 7 heroes present.
What I'm hearing basically is your hero absorbs the ability of others, and there are 7 evil bosses throughout the land who you need to fight. So this is basically a Mega Man game.
Yeah, I mean, a little. Yeah. I mean, and that's true. Like, even, this is a thing that I talk about in my review, but, each dungeon is themed kind of after the personality of
Jesus,
the
it is
hero.
a Mega Man game.
Yeah, so there is that kind of element where, for example, one of the heroes, you can fight them, and, you always have to fight Kazinsi first. But after that, I mean, you can pretty much fight them in any order, depending on the quest you do and your progression that you choose. And so, one that I fought early is Bakan, who is he's like a strategist. And when he was human, he was like a strategist for the 7 heroes. And in, his corrupted form, he's like a slave driver and like puppet master, right? And he has this land ship that's powered by captured slaves who run in like these hamster wheel contraptions to power the ship. And so his dungeon is full of traps, and there's full of enemy ambushes, and he even fights with like a puppet that he controls. So he, his whole like kind of master manipulator personality is embodied in his dungeon, and each hero, has a distinct personality, and their dungeons kind of fit that. And so there is a lot of variety there, and it is kind of like you're saying, like a Mega Man game where there's theme that fits each of these heroes, and that gives them really a good sense of accomplishment when you defeat them, and just makes every fight feel very climactic because there's a lot of build up before you face them.
Let's talk about something that I've always really liked about the Saga series, because I have ears, and that is the music. So the music of the Romancing SaGa series is wonderful. You just need to ask Patrick about that. Patrick will happily tell you about the music of Romancing SaGa. I'm assuming that here the original soundtrack is probably there, but also I would hope that they did like full reorchestrations of the entire thing. How does it sound?
Yeah, so it's excellent. So Kenji Ito returned to do a complete orchestral rearrangement of the soundtrack. And the tracks are fabulous. You've got such a wide range. Like, you have your battle theme, which is very, bombastic and intense. And then you have your town themes, which could be a little bit more, calm and melodic, or foreboding, or sad, or happy, just depending on what, the mood of the town or the quest in particular that is in that town is about. And then each of the 7 heroes has their own theme. So it's really, I think that's one of the best, improvements to the presentation is the orchestrated soundtrack, because the original soundtrack was so good, but, not the,
it was MIDI.
Yeah, it's MIDI, right? I mean, the SNES sound chip, it punches above its weight, right? But it's really nice to be able to hear these rearrangements, these orchestral rearrangements, and you can always swap in the menu to the original soundtrack at any time. And I thought that was a really nice touch because it allows you to compare them directly. And that gave me a better appreciation for both the rearrangements and the original soundtrack as well. So it's fantastic. They also added, full voice acting for most of the story scenes, and also like battle quips and things like that. So just in general, the audio experience is massively improved over the original.
I mean, it would kind of have to be, especially the audio clips.
Yes, yeah, something they couldn't do on the Super Nintendo for sure.
They could. It just wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Fight it out. Speaking of fighting it out, let's talk about the battle system. So the battle system in Romancing SaGa and the Saga series in general is very different from what you would expect from, for example, Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy, well, except for Final Fantasy 2, of course. In Final Fantasy, you fight monsters, you get experience points. It usually levels your character up in specific ways, but it's kind of out of your control. With the Saga series, it's quite a bit different, where skills, weapons, defenses, resistances, all of this levels up as you use it or as you are exposed to it. So historically, like Final Fantasy 2, for example, which again was a prototype, like your HP would grow the more you were attacked, that sort of thing. And this is a very divisive system in some games because it can make it a nightmare to pick up certain necessary abilities and to strengthen your character because, traditionally just grinding, it cannot just be you like mindlessly fighting. You need to specifically be targeting certain abilities in order to make your character stronger. Mm-hmm. So how is the battle system in the remake of Romancing SaGa 2 handled? Does it have anything that improves that with quality of life features to make it a little bit less frustrating?
Yeah, so there's actually a number of changes to the battle system compared to the original. So the original is like a turn-based system, round-based, not like a ATB like Final Fantasy was doing at the time. And this game maintains the basic foundation of the turn-based battle system, but it structures it around a timeline, which is more similar to Saga Scarlet Grace and Emerald Beyond. So your character turns are based on their speed and encumbrance, and you see them on the timeline. You can see enemy turns on the timeline, and then turns can be either sped up or manipulated along that timeline with status effects and things like that. So that does give you a little bit more of a strategic edge to combat because you know when enemy turns are coming up, and you have the ability to sometimes manipulate those turns, so you can interrupt a turn or something like that, or you can prepare for particularly big attacks, and that's a nice element. It makes the battles there's a little bit more expression of player agency inside of battles, and particularly like moment to moment. So the other big thing that they change about the battle system is there are these united attacks. So you have like an overdrive bar, and by hitting enemy weaknesses that you begin to fill that bar. And then when the bar is full, then you can do a united attack where characters will jump, they'll all cluster on the timeline. So wherever they were on the timeline is irrelevant because then they'll all attack immediately in sequence. And then those attacks are a little bit stronger. So that can allow you to, if you've got an enemy down in health, you can quickly eliminate that enemy before their turn would come up or things like that. So both those elements are, pretty significant changes, but they don't change the core of the battle system, I would say. And then in addition to that, so like you're talking about, the character progression in Saga is much different than a traditional RPG. You gain, health and in this case, they're battle points or BP, which is what you use for spells and techniques and everything. So those will raise as you do more battles. And then you also have proficiency levels in each major area of combat. So, that's like swords or bows or axes. As you use those items and abilities, then you would gain proficiency in those stats. And then that allows you to then master further techniques that require a higher level of proficiency. So kind of the beauty of Romancing SaGa 2, and especially this remake, is that because you're always going to be switching to a new generation after a certain amount of quest progression, that you're not locked into what you have at that time. And then the game also allows you to master abilities and then assign them to other characters and your incoming party in the next generation. So you're not stuck in whatever the proficiency you've chosen for one particular character. And your empire actually gains overall proficiency in each skill independent of the individual characters. So when you get to a new generation, those characters might also have improved stats because your overall level of proficiency has risen. So that allows you to experiment a lot more. This game also has like a wide ranging class system with a bunch of different classes. And so you can experiment with the classes and their specific class abilities as well. So there's just a lot more room for experimentation, and it's a lot less punishing because you're never really stuck in whatever way you've built a character, because you always have the opportunity to change things when a new generation comes around. The other big, there's some small quality of life changes, like techniques are previously in the series, the main thing is you glimmer them, which they just kind of appear, you master them randomly through using other abilities, right? And in this game, they actually show you, there's an indicator in the menu when a technique is more likely to glimmer a new technique. So that takes some of the guesswork out of acquiring new techniques. You always know, this one's more likely to give me a new technique. And even if you don't know what that's going to be, then if I use this now, I'm more likely to get something new. So it helps kind of break down some of the grind or monotony that was involved in that system before.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me. I know that Squaresoft was making decisions based on incomplete information about the Western market at the time. Like the video game market, even in the Super Nintendo era, was still untested. Yeah, there was likely lots of market research, but I imagine that most of that was focused on how many consoles are being sold at Toys R Us. But realistically speaking, the style of the Saga games in terms of the way the mechanics work, the way the progression works, is much more in line with a PC RPG, CRPG of the 1990s than any other console RPG that I can think of. And in that way, they really could have used this to appeal to a market that kind of, at the time especially, kind of looked at the Super Nintendo as a toy, but they missed it. And to be fair, I'm not blaming them about that, because they literally did not have the information to make that choice. They were working with limited resources in terms of people who could localize the games, but they did miss a big opportunity, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, once they missed that opportunity, and then once Saga had become more of a kind of B-tier franchise for Square, more in the modern era, there really just there wasn't that opportunity to kind of bring the series over to the West in a way that was super palatable to Western tastes, because, Unlimited Saga, for example, or even the Saga Frontier games to a certain extent are more niche in their appeal. Whereas the Romancing SaGa series, I think, could have had broad appeal at the time. But, when they brought them over in 2016, 2017, I think that those games still really hold up. But for a certain type of, a general, more casual RPG player, they're just a little too dated, right? To really get into. And, even if I don't feel that way about them, I know quite a few people do. But I think that that's kind of the strength of this remake, is that they've really kind of sanded off a little bit of the rough edges of the original without sacrificing any of the mechanical depth or the identity of the game, the core identity of the game. And that, I think, is going to make this game much more palatable to a general RPG playing audience. And you could see that in the reviews, right? So, my review is maybe a little bit on the higher end, but most of the reviews are very positive for this game, even from outlets that typically might score a Saga game more in the 6-7 range. You're seeing really high scores for this game. And I think that's just because they invested so much in the production value, expanding the scope and making it a lot more accessible. And that allowed people to like see the real value in this game, in its unique mechanics, in the generation system, and in the way that it chooses to tell its story. That maybe they were just not able to see before because those other elements kind of put them off before they could see the kind of diamond in the rough. And so I think that's I think maybe Square has recognized that they did miss an opportunity, and that this game is a way for them. They did invest significantly more resources, I think, in this version of the game than they have in Saga titles in a long time. And so I hope that encourages players to pick it up, because I think too, the benefit of this is that you're going to get introduced to a lot of Saga mechanics through this game, and they're going to be introduced to you in a way that are a lot easier to grasp and understand. And then you can take that knowledge to previous Saga games that have been released, and then you won't be starting from such a place where it's so hard to kind of break into. You would have that little bit of knowledge of the series and be able to navigate some of the more challenging or more obtuse games a lot easier if you've played this one. And this one is just a really great starting point.
Nice. You know what, Ben? You did such a good job of selling this game that I am actually not going to edit out this entire segment. I think I'll keep it in the episode. I think you should
try it, Jono. I think you would really. I think you'd like it. I think this would be at least maybe the one Saga game you would get into.
I think I'm going to try it. The review and this talk has really made me curious about it.
Yeah. My God, what have I done?
I'm going to convert you, Jono, one day. I'm going to.
Okay, well, let's move on to the discussion question now. Simply so I have to admit the fact that the protagonist basically, like, I know they're generations, but in terms of skill progression, basically time lording their way through the game is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so discussion question this week. We're not going to talk about games for a sec. I shared something at the beginning of this episode. I was talking about theater, which is it's not just a passion of mine. It was my job for literally 15, 20 years. So I wanted to kind of open the floor to both of you. And I was wondering, would you feel like sharing something that you've enjoyed at some point in the last few weeks that isn't a video game? So it can be like a TV show, movie, song, music, anything.
Yeah, I can start.
Sure.
So my wife and I recently watched this show Rivals, which is a British show, but it's on like Hulu and Disney Plus, I believe.
Oh, that's David Tennant, right?
Yes, David Tennant is in it. He plays a very shrewd and ruthless TV producer. And it's about, I think it's set in the 70s, and it's about rival television networks fighting over, I guess at the time, you had to, if you're a private television network, you would have to get like a franchise license, and then that has to be renewed every 5 years by the government. So there's a prominent television network that David Tennant runs, and it's kind of maybe has some more lowbrow kind of content. It's popular, but he hires a former BBC presenter to kind of give it a little more panache, a little more respectability, and then clashes with that journalist. And then the journalist breaks off, makes some rich friends in the area, and decides to challenge him for the franchise with their own competing TV network. And it is based on a novel that's a British romance novel, which I think was like pretty, risque. And you can kind of see that in the show a bit too. There's a lot of...
It is the second of the Rutshire Chronicles.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, so the name kind of says it all. And that's definitely like an element in the show, like there's a lot of, that kind of intimacy, let's say, in the show. But the show does a really good job of like updating the source material for a more modern audience. They've added some people of color, and they've added some, changed the approach to certain plot lines in the story to be a little more, sensitive to certain subjects that maybe, an author in the 70s in Britain wasn't super sensitive to. And then what I think elevates it is the performances are very good. So of course David Tennant is excellent, but the other actors do a really great job. And so it's like it's that kind of very pulpy, kind of trashy, almost like source material, but then with like really excellent performances. So it kind of scratches like both, the itch for like, trash TV, but also like prestige TV at the same time. So it's very good. If you like that kind of British drama, I recommend it.
I have a friend who I think will very much enjoy this. I think I might recommend it to her. Audra, how about you?
Well, I've pretty much fallen down the rabbit hole of reading webtoons comics. And especially graphic novels like Tower of God and Lore Olympus and freaking Romance and Castle Swimmers. So I've just been really busy in my spare time reading up on those. I think that's a great... Okay, to be fair, these aren't recommendations, folks. These are more just like, here's some stuff that we're enjoying. And if it sounds like it might hit you in the right spot, check that out. So that's neat. Would you I just said we're not recommending anything. What would you say is one of your favorites? Oh, I love Tower of God. If you're into like shonen action series manga, Tower of God is pretty much right up there. Tower of God. It has an anime adaptation too, which is pretty good as well.
Nice. Is it a lot of like, duels and explanation of people's powers and that kind of thing?
Yes. but with some really interesting plot twists.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, I mentioned the theater off the top, but I want to share something too, because I watched something with my parents when I was in Nova Scotia, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was nothing... I would not say it's the best thing I've ever watched, but it was really fun because, Ben, when you mentioned British television, my parents really like police procedurals and some British police procedurals. And they were looking for something new, and I did some research, and it just so happened that around the same time, a new British procedural came out that was also a bit of a dramedy series called Ludwig. And this is a show that stars David Mitchell, and he is playing a puzzle setter, so a puzzle maker. He's a recluse, very socially awkward gentleman, and he gets a call from his sister-in-law, who says that his twin brother, who was a detective chief inspector at the police, has gone missing. And she wants his help to figure out where he went. And her theory is, I need you to get his notebook at his desk at the station. So just pretend to be him, go in and get the notebook. And he is horribly socially awkward and scared of everything. And he goes into the police station, and they immediately grab him and drag him to the site of a murder. And because they think he's his brother, and he starts to discover that he's one of the most successful puzzle setters in the world. He starts discovering that he has a real knack for solving murder mysteries. So as the show goes on, he keeps getting pulled into solving these murder mysteries, while at the same time he's trying to figure out what happened to his brother and where he went. It is charming and funny in places, and David Mitchell delivers a just fantastic performance that's really, really endearing. Like, this guy could be kind of come off as pathetic, but he never comes off as pathetic because he has a pride in himself that is quiet. And the sister-in-law, played by Anna Maxwell Martin, is such a good foil to him and is just driving him forward and driving the plot forward. It's really good. It's only 6 episodes. Apparently, it was a bit of a hit, so presumably it's going to be getting more than that. I hope it does, because it was a fun show. And if you like a British police procedural and you want a slightly more comedic take on that still has a lot of dramatic elements, Ludwig, Ludwig.
I'll have to look out into that one.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
Yeah, and I mean, if you like David Mitchell is what was his sketch comedy show? The Mitchell and Webb Situation. He is in one of my all-time favorite British sketches, which is the Are We the Baddies sketch.
Oh, yeah.
It's so frigging funny. It's one of those things that always makes me laugh just because it's really funny. Why skulls? Anyway, so yeah, we're offering those things we enjoyed out there to support them. And if you want to find a way to support us here at RPG Fan, we have opened a store. Yes, I'm giving the actual transition to this now. You can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop. I recommend that you check out our collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, the RPG Fan Review Card Collection. And that includes a showcase of 30, well, nearly 30 of our review cards that you can find on Instagram. If you go on any of our social medias, you should be able to see lots of examples of those. It's a wonderful book. I could not recommend it more. You should also check out our past episodes of Random Encounter. Last week, we got to talk about 2 other major 2024 releases, Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom, and Metaphor ReFantazio. The last few weeks have been kind of crazy in terms of amazing games, and people are feeling very overwhelmed about them and don't really know what to play next. But you want to know what? Just pick one and play it. I guarantee you'll enjoy it. We also have Retro Encounter, which is our show focused on retro gaming, and the last 2 weeks have just been Solosi's dream episodes of retro as they played through Kingdom Hearts 2. Forcing Solosi to play through Kingdom Hearts is a little like forcing me to play through, well, Saga. So you should actually give these episodes a listen to just hear what he thought of the game. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fan's music podcast. And since we are approaching Halloween, Mike and Hillary decided that it would be time to celebrate the spooky season with the first Halloween episode we've done since 2020. Clearly, it's hard to imagine anything spookier than 2020. But if you are looking for a trick-or-treat soundtrack, absolutely check this episode out. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can fire me off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. If you have any suggestions for discussion questions, ideas for future episode themes, anything at all, please fire it off to me. I'd love to hear it. If you'd like to send me an email directly, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. And we also have 2 other folks in this podcast. Audra, where can we find you online?
You can find me on email at audrab@rpgfan.com.
Cool. And Ben?
You can find me at benloganlove@gmail.com.
Cool. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. And you can also rate us on iTunes or your other podcast players of choice, and feel free to leave us a review. Audra, Ben, I really want to thank you for coming on tonight. It's a Friday night. I always appreciate when folks can spend their Friday night with me instead of doing things with their loved ones or out with friends or really doing anything fun aside from hanging out with me on a podcast and talking about video games. So thank you so much for giving me your evening. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Of course, it was a pleasure.
Yes.
It actually was a pleasure to talk to you, Audra, about that game. Ben, you're also here. No, Ben, it was a pleasure to talk to you about Romancing SaGa. Genuinely.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank everyone out there for joining us, and to everyone listening, whatever you're playing, have fun.